site of Jasenovac, and then we have Topografia la Storia, and the organization known as Associazione 4704. And from Germany, we have the University of Regensburg and Mannheimer Center from Dachau. From Slovenia, we have Zavodapis and Socialna Academia. And with all the other organizations that are here, we have been cooperated with them for shorter or longer periods. And we have tried to do everything that we can that the victims that are less visible or fully invisible from World War II or afterwards will be as more present in the public as possible, because especially in the last couple of years, we have been able to notice some sort of a process of Holocaustization. What is being visible in the remembrance, and because Holocaust as the genocide against the Jews and as a specially emphasized very horrible crime is something that we remember. But it is very important that when we discuss about Croatia and for the post-Yugoslav countries, but also in the European context, to emphasize the genocide against the Serbs, Romas, and the casualties of anti-fascists, be them Croats, Bosniaks, Italians, or any others. Also, as part of this project, we have a strong line and of remembrance from the victims and the survivors from the Italian concentration camps. We would like to remember the less visible victims that have suffered due to their sexual orientation or being homosexuals. And we have also discussed about the other groups in order to organize the activities and how to involve other groups as we implement those activities. Today's discussion will first of all be dedicated to the position of the remembrance sites and memorials. And we're going to start from a great challenge that is related to increasing or strengthening the role of the memory site or remembrance site of Jasenovac. And here we have the most relevant people who can talk about this matter. Those are Ivo Pejaković, he is the head of the site, and Aneta Vladimirov, she is the member of the council of the Jasenovac site. And she is also the member of the Serbian National Council. And he's going to, Ivo Pejaković is going to talk about one survivor from Stara Gradiška. And first of all, I'll give the floor to Ivo Pejaković, and to bring it closer to us when it comes to the position of Jasenovac, because we know that for years we have witnesses of various visitors and remembrance columns. We know that this is no longer just one column, a column of remembrance that we have been witnessing in the last decades, but it happens very often that the coordination of the Jewish municipalities commemorates it differently. And with the representatives of Romas and anti-fascists. And on the other hand, we have the Prime Minister and the President who do commemorate this especially. What is the situation for the remembrance site of Jasenovac? Mr. Pejaković, can you go on, please? And I hope you can hear me. I'd like to greet the organizers, Vesna and Documenta, and also the other partners that participate in the project, with whom we've had the meetings in the last couple of days when it comes to planning and from everything that is related to this part of the project for this year and for the other years that are from also Croatia, but other countries from abroad. When it comes to this title of this online forum and to our panel discussion, we are going to start with some basic things, and then we can go further on into more detailed and more concrete issues. So the Jasenovac Memorial Site has been established in 1968. And of course, it was established with the aim to preserve the memory on the victims of the camp. And also the basic activities of the institution included education, publishing activities, all the way to museal activities, because when the institution itself was established in 1968, and 2 years, the same year actually, the Memorial Museum has been established, which up to date had 3 permanent exhibitions. And when we look into this period of Yugoslavia, since the last of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we can say that this was a site that was visited, first of all, from schools and groups of school children from all over Yugoslavia. And the number of visitors in the next years, at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, it was more than 300,000 visitors a year. So through discussion with the people that have dealt with the culture of remembrance, and especially in particular republics of Yugoslavia, there was this situation when in some republics, for instance in Croatia, although there was no some official decision for school groups to visit the memory site of Jasenovac, that was something that was understood. A big number of schools did come and visited this area, and that was related to the visits of the memorial on Kozara, which is related not far away from Jasenovac. And somehow those 2 stories have been related because the number of the detainees was deported from Kozara to Jasenovac during the large offensive that took place in summer 1942 of fascists and Nazists in this area, and where the partisans were very successful. And most of the population, primarily the Serbs, have been deported towards the camps themselves. So also in the other republics, sometimes in some of the documents, this is something that's mentioned, and it says that it's been a compulsory visit to the Jasenovac camp. But there was a problem there as well, because that was not in line with the age of the students themselves. And this is something that happened in the first years of the elementary school, when the students were younger than 10 years of age. So there have been the stories of, there have been stories that have been retold in the Memorial Museum, and they have been dedicated to the visitors that at this age group were not able to understand the entire context and all the events that happened there, and the entire political situation that prevailed back then. And it's the same today to understand the concepts of fascism, Nazism, and its legacies. That is something that might seem incomprehensible. And again, when we are thinking about new periods, when we have the time of institutions, when Croatia has been established, and since the federal socialist Yugoslavia fall apart, we can say that this museum has been closed down due to all of the war events and everything that happened there. And lots of war activities happened at the Jasenovac site and Jasenovac as a place. So that's something that also Croatia did not have any control of this area. And then the museum was closed down from 1991 until 2006, when the permanent exhibition of the museum was opened as well. So then those changes occurred during this time in the camp and in the village. The fact is that the memorial site of Jasenovac is the only institution in the territory of Croatia that deals directly with World War II. So all of the other institutions somehow have had some of their own activities, or they've had they've been related to some other institutions that were involved in offering or organizing activities that are related to memory. So most of the memory, nonetheless, have been mainstreamed to this homeland war of the 90s. Everything else was somehow forgotten, more or less. So, you know, lots of activities and locations from this period was up to some of the enthusiasts and NGOs that cared about it, and way less it was up to the institutions. And the ones that have done this more actively includes Aneta, which comes from the Serbian National Council. That was one of the institutions that have taken up on itself to memorize some dates and some of the events and some of the crimes and atrocities that happened during World War II against the Serbian population, but also the other groups of people, and also the alliance of anti-fascists based on the capacity that they might have had or still have, and as much as they can participate, managed or tried to do as much of activities to remember those events. Also, the Roma's Union recently has been more engaged and more active, and they try to memorize or remember Roma victims, and also to increase the visibility in the public of those victims in order to make this group of victims more visible in comparison to what had happened before. And we have also mentioned the coordination of Jewish municipalities, and that is something that is related to Holocaust and to the atrocities that have been committed against the Jews. And we're going to put this into the same line and find some sort of a common name for all of that. We can say that this is something that comes along the same dates that are related to the memory of the victims of the Jasenovac camp and the genocide that has been committed against the Serbs and the Romas, so in the camp itself, and that brought to the divided commemorations in the recent years. And we, as an institution that belongs to the Ministry of Culture, so we are officially part of those official institutions or state bodies. And then on the other hand, it is impossible to do our job without cooperating with the representatives of the people victims. So the Serbian community, Roma community, anti-fascists, unions, and so on. And under these circumstances, our task is to try to find some sort of a common narrative, common language, because if not all are going to be on the same side, then it's going to be hard to bring to some progress for the institutions themselves. And this progress can be summarized into three key things. First of all, it is to increase the number of school groups that would visit the memorial site of Jasenovac. And as I've said, during the Yugoslav times, we had 300,000 visitors a year. And in previous year, we've had 16,000. And the number of school groups, maybe it's about 15 or so. And that is on an annual basis. In order to change that, we are aware of the fact that it is crucial to change a couple of things, because we've had a couple of cases in the last couple of days and couple of weeks that are related to the last days of high schools. And that includes the senior high school students that have shown Ustaše symbols and salutes, and that shows that they lack any knowledge about World War II and everything that happens there. Of course, we're not expecting them to be experts on Holocaust or World War II, but during secondary education, we would expect them to have been able to obtain certain knowledge about what happened during this period of time. The other aspect which we will look to develop is that inside of the institution itself, the memorial site or the memorial site of Jasenovac, to try to bring some of the models in order to respond to the challenges that exist in front of us, and also include some sort of a department that deals with research and investigation that for sure would succeed in improving the situation in the institution from inside. And the third thing is related to the locations that are part of the memorial area of Jasenovac. So Jasenovac is not only where the camp was in the village of Jasenovac, but it was also near the other sites, in the other areas. Brojčica, Stara Gradiška, and so on and so forth. So just want to say a couple of words about Stara Gradiška, about this location that we are planning to visit during this program that we're working together with Documenta. And that is something that will be an opportunity to organize a ceremony to remember the casualties or the victims of this camp. And I would say that those sites are in a very poor condition because they haven't been rebuilt. They've been damaged during the homeland war, and of course they require financial means for that. But that's something that has to be done. That's something that will need to be done in the future. All right, I've taken more than 10 minutes, I would say, so perhaps I can stop here, and I would give the floor to the other panelists to share their thoughts. Thanks a lot, Ivo. Thank you for this very clear start and for the big start of the building in Gradiška. And I believe that this is something going to happen only by gaining the support of the government of Republic of Croatia and European Union. And I would like to ask now Aneta Vladimirov to relate to this and from her perspective to describe to us what would be important to do in order for the institutions to strengthen and to fight the consequences of revisionism that we are witnessing for the last 30 years or so. Thank you very much, Vesna. I'd like to greet Documenta and all of the partners that have participated in this very important project. We have our colleague Ivo Pejaković, who does some very important things for us in Croatia as well. I'd like to share some PowerPoint with you in order to speak in a more structurized manner, Vesna, about on your questions. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this. So, due to the fact that the call of conscience is something that won the connotation that it deserves, and I'm not going to go too much into the cultures of remembrance and practices related to it. So now I'm going to talk about this call of conscience, which is a minority, undefended, very hardly politically defended position. And now we have an illustration from the film that shows the theater play of Antigona, which calls about the call of conscience that is related to this drama, and they take into account that the camp systems are very old and they go into the time of when Antigona was written. I think that the comparison would be the right one. So as Ivo says, that the Jasenovac is the only institution that in the pedagogical systematized way through its museal activities deals with the Holocaust, massive crimes, genocides, and other crimes that have been committed against the human beings in the Jasenovac site during its length. So according to this time, I would say that we would say that if I interpret something wrongly, the institution is in charge to deal with from the moment when it was established until the prisoners were taken over. So through this system, we have inherited an entire system of institutes that have dealt with revolution, workers' movements, and so on and so forth, and also the other systems of concentration camps. And this is not the first concentration camp in the independent state of Croatia. Therefore, the investigation of this system of camps is a responsibility of an institution that has less than 10 employees, and not to mention the other aspects, which is related to the support that is related to continuous development of the city and the institution. And as Ivo said, as the first line of cooperators are the representatives of the people who have been victims. And I myself come from one of these communities, from the Serbian Council, alongside with the Romas and the Jews and the others. And as part of this council, we also have the so-called administrative body, which represents certain different system. And as you might tell it yourself, this council has only an advisory role. There are a couple of issues that, since the institution has opened in 2006, and they repeat from year to year, and that culminated with something that are visible to everyone, and that is related to dividing the commemorative practices that from the repetitive classical manifestations have turned into some sort of a rebellion or resistance towards the relation, not only of the public institutions, but also of the entire attitude towards World War II, and based on the values that are related to anti-fascism, on which we believe that the modern Republic of Croatia should base its values on. And of course, the first and initial problem is related to the permanent exhibition that since the very beginning has caused a couple of issues, especially when it comes to the representatives of victims' communities, and the reconstruction of the museum itself, based on its implementation, has not been really consistent and did not create everything that would enable a different moment from the one that exists now. Lots of spaces were closed. So there was some sort of a on principle reconstruction, and the context has been left aside, and the chance was there. And also the ones who were responsible, the ones who perpetrated those crimes, would have been emphasized in a special way. And of course, can create the line or the relation between the other concentration camps like Gospic and Pag, and also the attempts to rebuild what was happening around Jasenovac. Also, it is important to mention and repeat what the head of the institution said. That is a lack of dedication to this area, especially with taking into account that statistically, more often, half of the visitors or a big portion of these visitors are the ones that did not come from Croatia, or they come dominantly from a couple of areas such as Istria, and then there is very few of those visitors from the other parts of the country. That shows a decrease in interest, not only decrease in interest, but also some sort of a politics of forgetfulness without the lack of action that gives space for revisionism and negation in the Republic of Croatia, that as a consequence brings those cases like Pejaković mentioned, such as we've had the results with the cases of the high school seniors in Slavonski Brod recently, where they saluted World War II Ustaše salutes. And since actually Ivo Pejaković became the head of the memorial site, this institution, we are of course shocked by that because it has very few financial means, still manages to get some great activities, and it's able to do lots of publishing activities, and we have lots of pedagogical employees and researchers that are fully engaged. And of course, in the museums, in every single museum, And we have the pedagogical department in Jasenovac, and we can see that this is a very important department that can represent its own special unit on itself. So there is a range of negative factors. Here is an illustration that we can see, which is based on some comparative method. So in Croatia, there are two public institutions, memorial sites. The first one is the one of the homeland war in Vukovar, the other one in Jasenovac. And this is something that has its own legal frameworks, and data from 2019 shows it's very indicative. It shows that when it comes to the visibility of the financial means and so on and so forth, the memorial center or the public institution of Vukovar has been supported by 8 times the amount, and brings to the fact that on annual basis in Vukovar you have 14,000 high school students in comparison to the number from Jasenovac. And of course, this shows that the relation towards these two subjects is very different. And this is related to the fact how we remember the traumas and how do we learn about those traumas. And I believe that this fact is very important. And I think that it should really, we should really support and support and of course say that we are in favor of supporting Vukovar as memorial site, but also criticize their attitude towards Jasenovac. Of course, what happens in Jasenovac, and if there would be conditions, there would be more support, and or if there would be a chance to include a larger number of experts and from that ones that would deal with those very demanding subjects. And for the illustration, it is important to mention that it's not important to have into account on the institutional level, but none of the parties that we can see here in the programs of these parties, you do not have facing of the past or anything that is related to the history, which means that does not belong to political priorities or something that those political parties define as their common value or something that they struggle for. Also, we have a data that in Croatia, we have 8 history departments or history faculties, and that data is fascinating considering taking into account that Jasenovac is the only institution that deals with World War II in an organized and structured way. And we have had also the data that high school students come to Jasenovac, but the high schools are obliged to cover their own costs and then ask for reimbursement from Ministry of Education, which makes the organizing way more difficult. And also the other institutions, especially uh, as professors, you would suggest to the councils of the parents and the two institutions themselves a visit to Jasenovac. Also, on the same way, the education in Jasenovac has excluded the special professions that in their organizational activities and let's say the people who worked in the railway service or the transport services. I think that they will be included and bring different perspectives on educating or learning about Holocaust, which would be well not only visually adapted, but let's say we have education for railway workers that we included exclusively for their profession and to take into account that they do not learn about something that is important for educational knowledge in general, for knowledge that is related to their civic knowledge in general. And at the same time, they learn something about the ethical things, same as medical faculty and all the other professions that would have to include some other wider knowledge and the ethical norms and this perspective will have to be included in this education because in this way you can also include the youngsters from various political parties and all the activists. So the knowledge about Jasenovac and from Jasenovac will have to include more creative interpretations and so on and so forth. This is a digression, that diversion from what we wanted to say is that I want to emphasize shortly to whom the youngsters would give their support. It's the policy, the army, and this data is important when we're talking about revisionism. And maybe we can talk about brutal revision, or the negation, or the basically uh, the celebration of the Ustashi regime. So in this society, when the youngs are depolitized, and in this case, we have the status quo maintained, and it looks, and it's very the same as I can describe. The very well-known researcher has an attitudes towards couple of sites in Jakova and Split, and in symbolical, important symbolic sites, the people would have a chance to hear about lies, counterfeit stories, and everything that are related to the versions and that are related to the concentration system of Jasenovac, and for the needs of the modern politics as they are developed right now. When it comes to the attitude towards the history in such a way, we become subjects of manipulation, not subjects of memory or remembrance. So this is an example which can tell us more about that. Of course, we can organize an entire lecture that is related to this only. So what is a remembrance culture, or the culture of remembrance from the minority perspective? That means in shaping and learning about history based on the experience and not identity, where experience is the common name for all that want to learn something about themselves, and the generations that will come after us. They want to learn about for the area of the so-called neurological past, as some would call it. And Jasenovac is one of those sites for Republic of Croatia, not only for Republic of Croatia. Those are some of the cases how through some temporary memorial interventions in the space in which everyone want to maintain as public. And this is, for instance, an activity that we have implemented 2013. It was an artistic act which had a goal to locate the detainees in the camp. Another reproduction was the so-called K-19, where we've had original bricks that have been brought from the factory where camp prisoners were forced to work there. They have been put in 5 abstract shapes and forms, and this meant an discrete commemorization in those public spaces in Zagreb and in other spots as well, and in parallel level, also showing some sort of anger of the people that do not want to see on public spaces the content of this kind. And of course, the issue of learning about Jasenovac is about learning about diversity and humanitarian and solidary action. And this is a photo of Aneta Dimic, who is probably one of the best known cases of political organizing and solidarity in World War II, and the unusual vulnerability and youth when she was murdered in February 1942. And here we have some of the quotes of uh, the other women that were also detained with her. But apart from that, not the image, there are many others that have been detained in Jasenovac. Of course, most of them haven't survived it, but during this time, when they were in the camp, they have shown resistance towards dehumanizing, humiliation, and they showed also some sort of a sign of solidarity with the other people detained over there, which means that they all wanted to coexist with the others that want to survive their own lives and to feel as less pain as possible. On the other hand, we also have Diana Budisavljevic and again Nada Dimic and Ljubica Jančić and all the others that can tell us so much about it. And this is a great case to learn so much about this. What is solidarity, and so on and so forth. And how much of that we can do this. I know Jasenovac deals so much with itself, and when it comes to the concentration system of Jasenovac, I think that this is not sufficiently visible in the exhibition, nor the people that work in Jasenovac have enough time to deal with this. And this is the photo from Sisak on the location where the children that have not survived separation from their parents have been buried, and that unfortunately haven't been fostered. And they've been in children's concentration camp in Sisak. As you can see, those are a couple of people that have survived this camp, the children uh, that have gone there to visit the site of them. And I would say when it comes to the way how we mediate between the trauma that have happened and the ones that do not know much about trauma, we can use various models and different models. And something that has been very recent is using the so-called radio voices or radiophonia, which also shows the images that has been exploited for nationalist needs and revisionist attempts. And here we have gone away from the images, from the photos towards the sound. And the goal was to form or shape Zagreb of 1941 and to emphasize the question of what kind of attitude we are towards Jasenovac, something that can be used actually in Jasenovac as well. And I have two more slides. Vesna, I would like to apologize if I took too long. What you can see right here is very recent. A couple of weeks ago, we've had a group of 40 students and some teachers from the Faculty of Political Sciences and from the Academy of Arts photo section and of the University in Zagreb. They've had the chance to go through various locations. And on the right-hand side, you can see the students that are in Krapje, where we have been met by Martina Varasic, and we have later been visiting the Jasenovac as well. And there we have been met by the curator there. Here we see the sites of the 5 months before Jasenovac was been established as a camp. And this is the way how the adults, in this case students, can work when it comes to building remembrance policies and attitudes. And for the very end, I want to share a little inspiration. It is not efficient to share what Jasenovac was, and we use very few of literally materials, and we know about certain texts and poems and whatnot that have been written from Chamil Siaric, for instance, that has been created in 1945. We know that he has visited the Jasenovac camps. And here we have Anton Barac and his great book called The Escaped from the Book. And that's been used just once, thanks to Jura Castellan. And an entire chapter has been dedicated to Stara Gradiška. Anton Barac has been remembered, and the historian and writer, and of course, one of his most important books when it comes to the intellectual history and related to World War II in the independent state of Croatia, and the responsibility of intellectuals that have found themselves on both sides of this history. Anton Barac has spent a part of his life in Stara Gradiška, although he did not see necessarily the worst that has been visible in the system. And his memory and his writings about this is one of the best ways to learn about this. And the shock of the people that deal with this will be avoided in order to emphasize learning or studying about what has happened. And this is one of his numerous poems that he's left behind himself. And of course, by giving us a short illustration of our memorial commemorative practices, will end my presentation. I would like to apologize if I have taken too long. Thank you so much, Aneta, for this very rich presentation, which definitely helps us understand what is all needed in order to strengthen this single institution in Croatia that deals with investigation, but also is in charge of educating public about what happened during World War II. I think it has been exceptionally interesting, and I'm very happy that Mr. Thomas Porena is going to present a biography here, because our biographical research is of exceptional importance. Thomas represents Topografia per la storia, and some of you would probably do not know, but that is an institution that acts from its seat in Rome, but also other parts. And in fact, it is the one that has mostly researched Italian fascistic camps and prisons, and that it is an unavoidable resource that has been filled further with more information, because this project cannot be over ever. And I believe that Thomas can tell us a little bit more about Bruno Prister, that has survived many camps. Thomas, please go ahead. Yes, thank you. I'd like to share my screen to see if we can see enough. Yes, we can see something, because I cannot see myself right now because I'm changing the subject and the attitude. I'm going to change my language as well.
Because my broken English is exactly so good like my broken Croat, but I prepare everything in English, and for the broader audience could be better. I hope it is good okay from our wonderful translator, but I hope yes. Exactly. You will see here on my screen who I am. The Topografia per la storia is wonderful and briefly already described by Vesna, but just a couple of things more. Exactly, our topics are this big, huge database and the history of Italy after September 8, 43. And in this occasion, Topografia per la storia is as well promoting a visiting tour to Rab for the 8th of September with Eric Gobetti. This apart, I will focus like a historian and like an educator to a biography who is incredibly a fil rouge, a connection between the most of our topics of the project. Each organization will recognize a part of their dealing with history in this biography. It is really incredible. It is a biography of an old, it was an old man from Zagreb of Jewish origin. And the name is in the next page. You can see Bruno Prister. He was a musician, a composer. And please follow this biography because it's really, really interesting. And I will add something to what is already known by the historical research, because it's, I think, what I discovered in an archive in Rome. And exactly, so he's born in Zagreb from a Jewish, not really, not rich at all family. And his passion of music, he had to abandon it because the father tried to insisted to that the son study something what is economically worth to for the family, and so he studied in the trade academy, but he worked by side for promote to finance financially for promote his music studies. He was politically active in the trade union Spotic. It's a trade union of clerks, of employees of the state, and was very close before the war, the Second World War, to the Communist Party. Although they were not really workers, but employees, so there were some difference. Anyway, exactly, he was as well leftist. What is, if you considering the musical production, and he was the core master of this worker singing society, Custodia. And exactly for this reason, in the year 40, so before 1 year before the war, he was arrested and imprisoned in the Lepoglava prison for several months. And with the beginning of the war, he was already free, but he was not took prisoner from the German, because he was like Croat, and Croats prisoners of war were liberated almost after the beginning of the war. And so he returned to Zagreb, and he tried to combat this the policy of the Ustasha, that the Jews have to wear this sign, the Jewish sign, but his protest was rejected. And with his wife Jelka, born Susmel, he abandoned the town of Germany. So Bruno Prister became a prisoner of the concentration camp of Dachau. But in Dachau, he was registered as, and this is quite funny, because a friend of him in Maliloshin made a false document of identity for him. And Priester in German is like priest, but it's not it was not written Priester, but just Priester. So his last name was Svečnjak, from Svečnik in Croatian. So Bruno Svečnjak was his new name. He was registered as Roman Catholic, as Italian man who spoke fluently German, Italian, and French. And he was a clerk, but mainly a musician. And in Dachau, he made he has a good friend, and in the archives of the personal archives of this friend, Giovanni Melodia, who was the referent for the Italian in the Dachau concentration camp. I found several interesting political position of Bruno Prister, who after the war had this career. You can see, I will not read everything, but exactly, he was a teacher. He abandoned his profession of being clerk and focused more and more on this musical passion, because in the socialism the money problem was probably not so more centered. I don't know. And this information are Bruno Priester was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation in the beginning of the 90s, and actually this interview is just visible from Germany or from the States. I don't know if from Croatia it is possible, but exactly, I had a look. I wrote down some notice in Germany before coming here. And exactly, he composed as well Jewish music and of Jewish tradition, Jewish theme, like the Jewish revolt of Bar Kokhba, or as well a prelude for the piano called Dachau. And exactly this Dachau prelude was the matter of this letter exchange with Giovanni Melodia from Rome. Giovanni Melodia asked him in Italian, because Bruno Priester spoke fluently, perfectly Italian, and wrote perfect Italian. What's about, he asked Bruno Prister, what's about this prelude Dachau? And Bruno Priester answered, yeah, it was played in the radio, in Radio Zagreb, and probably the RAI, the Italian radio and television state channel tried to play it as well, and Giovanni Melodia tried to give him this possibility. But Giovanni Melodia asked him another thing. He asked him what about the Dachau trials in Slovenia, and it was quite interesting because not in the Yugoslav, on the former Yugoslav broader dimension, the Dachau, so-called Dachau trials, Dachauski processi, were always considered just Slovenian trial. They were a proceed against former function inmates, Funktionshäftlinge, so capos and so on, communists from Slovenia, who were processed and condemned, executed 11 of them, 48 in Slovenia, because the Communist Party considered them as Gestapo members. But what is not known is that the Dachauski process, the Dachauski trials, Dachau trials, were the peak of a bigger iceberg, and the revision of all the communist structure in the inmates, in the prison, in Yugoslavia and abroad were more larger. So the inmates of Stara Gradiška, of Jasenovac in Yugoslavia, and outside in Dachau, Buchenwald, Mauthausen, the forced labor camps of Vienna, and the forced labor camps in Norway were put under suspicion to be that there the communists were Gestapo men. So again, to the question of Giovanni Melodia and what happened with the Dachau trials. Bruno Priester tried not to answer. He just say it was terrible, but I was always afraid about Oskar Juranic. He said just this, but who is Oskar Juranic? Oskar Juranic was the only one Croat sentenced to death in the Dachau trials in Slovenia, former Spanish fighter, former inmate in France, in Dachau, old guard communist who was sentenced to death, and Bruno Priester just say, Oskar Juranic, I was afraid from them, but he don't answer any more about Dachauski processes, so that in the next letter, Giovanni Melodia understand and no ask nothing more. So you see, on one hand, this biography show you all the topography of our research, and show us the Italian participation, the Ustascha participation, the German Nazi participation, but focus as well on the aftermath and the remembrance of former deportees in Yugoslavia, and why there were not such developed remembrance, nor of communists, nor of not communists, because just the communists in these Dachauski trials and other trials, more than 8,000 former anti-fascists were put under suspicion in these trials. So you can imagine, if 8,000 anti-fascists, younger and older, were put under suspicion, what happened to all the people who were not anti-fascists? They had to shut the mouth. So that's our presentation for the moment. Maybe we will play some song, because Bruno Priester wrote as well songs for minors, or songs, leftist songs. If you put the music Miroslav Krleža and song, maybe we will try to find the partitur of the music sheet. So that's for me for the moment, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Puno hvala.
For this, the book materials the exhibition and the musical performance will brought us an impressive illustration on what means to bring into effect something that is a result of illustration of the research, and how important the publishing activities of Jasenovac is important. And our project is one of such examples, and in it we will have the chance to hear the music, to choose the music, but we're going to be able also to communicate with the decision makers, as in the countries where we come from, but also we want to create an opportunity to create the European remembrance policies, which can be improved. We can include also the remembrance politics in Croatia. We are going to keep working on this intensely, with thanking the introducers. And I would like to ask you right now if among the ones that are listening are the ones that have comments, that have something to add, something to discuss before I will address some additional questions myself.
Kako ne bi dalje uživali u tišini,
In order not to enjoy the silence further, perhaps I can ask Aneta in Ivo, what would perhaps be the most important issues and the most important priorities that we can address jointly, because our goal is, on one hand, to improve the cooperation between the institutions that act, and on the other hand, to address a couple of questions to decision makers. So what shall we focus on as first of all, second and third? And when Ivo was talking, he mentioned that the first priority and the indicator of progress is the increase of number of school groups that visit the institution, and on the other hand, the development of institutions themselves. So to be able to create certain departments, that's something that Aneta has spoken of later as well. And then we would stop to Gradiška and talk about reconstruction. And I'd like to ask you, we can specify this further, because the colleagues are listening very carefully what has been presented, and some of our joint requests we will put on paper, and those would be some sort of conclusions of our work. I don't know if you have something to add. Aneta is nodding. Well, I might go ahead first, and then they later can relate to this. So perhaps some of the things that we have emphasized, perhaps they do not deserve this order as they've been presented, but they are equally important when it comes to the work in the institution that has been emphasized. And all of this is correlated, of course. And it's correlated with some distant or less distant perspective. And something that I haven't mentioned, and Aneta has in her presentation, and that is the issue of the museal activity. And as she mentioned, there's been criticism since the permanent exhibition has been opened in 2006. So now we're talking about a period of 16 years since the time when the permanent exhibition has been set up. So that we've had enough time, and this means that we are living through some limited surface space of 300 square meters. We have 2 exhibitional areas, and what can be related to this is building a completely new building or new premises that are mentioned as annex to museal exhibition. And I believe that this will have to be the main area where the new permanent exhibition will be located in the future that will be larger than the existing one, or the existing exhibition of that is right now exhibited. Discussions on the matter have been led so far, and I hope that in the near future there will be some concrete results. But I'd like to go to some of the issues that we have mentioned. So since the internal development institutions that are of equal importance, because so far we've been able to organize a couple of groups, 15 groups a year, and there we are hoping that there's going to be an increasing number of visits of the school groups starting from the next academic year or school year, and I hope that there's not going to be any limitations related to coronavirus. But I hope that we're going to be able to establish a new pedagogical department with more people that are going to have more workshops, more programs, more ideas, and simply we need to have people that will be able to deal with this educational part of the activities in a very quality way and in a right way, if I may say so. I don't know if Aneta would like to add something to this, what I said. Well, in fact, I can just support what Ivo said. From one hand, we can say that the most urgent thing is the minimum of organizational dignity of the memorial site of Jasenovac, where the researchers will be able to do their job and offer, get the support to write the books, to publish their works and whatnot, and to the educators, to the academics, to offer their chance to publish their work and to try to define who is going to be the target groups of our publications. And we're going to look at some more vulgar attitudes towards the institution that does not have any publishing activity for the upcoming period. And apart from building the annex to the museum that will cost, and of course, there will always be an excuse for not acting towards this, to do things that cost nothing. First of all, is the fact that if you cannot afford yourself or organize the visits of the students to Jasenovac, and most probably in a scope of 100 kilometers, you can find those things. And we can go to the anti-fascists or the ones that have so you cannot go to Jasenovac in order not to be able to talk about this context. So there are issues that belong to the scope of enthusiasm and the goodwill that still exists, which is very surprising, and it's related to creativity as well. Of course, there are parts of the institution that are related to a more significant financial support of the responsible ministry and the government of Republic of Croatia. Thank you so much, Aneta. We have been speaking a lot also about the agreements and negotiations that went inside of the government with the aim to increase the role and strengthen the role of the institution. Do we have any feedback if something has happened new there? We can expect any moves there, and we have any maybe feedback on that one. I'd like also to say that Sasha has thanked all the panelists. Sasha Petian has thanked all the panelists for their presentations. Was that a question addressed to me, to you, or to Ivo? So if you have any feedback, you might share that with us, if you could, or simply in request for some future comment, because before this annual commemoration, as far as the public is informed, we've had one or more meetings, and after that, we haven't been able to hear what happened further on. And unfortunately, in the previous years, there have been a couple of examples that things will change in the future. And then the meetings have been lacking for the meetings to organize in March and April, when the unity around the commemorative activities should have been shown. I think there have been different trials and mistakes which we are witnesses of. When it comes to this attitude, I would say that none of those administrations haven't really been very successful on asserting a political range of ideas, be that it comes from the left or the right. We've had some unusual phenomenon of taking the compensation to the Jasenovac camp prisoners, and therefore this history of bad political action we have inherited. And when it comes to this, I would be very careful. And for sure that we are working on this. And in any case, at any given moment, whomever comes and works with us, be that they come from NGOs or governments or the political parties, of course, that all of us, we have this responsibility, be that we recognize this responsibility or not. And of course that we can bring some changes, but I'm not sure if when it comes to a couple of things, well, everything's too late. Here we're talking about the research of the archives and working with the survivors that has lacked fully when it comes to Jasenovac. And when it comes to the pedagogical approach, we have been very late when it comes to that, regardless of individual approaches and some small successes that we've been able to achieve. We haven't been able to learn from the survivors, and that's something that has to be taken into account as a mistake, that perhaps it will help us learn better for the future actions. And I think that until the next meeting, I think some of the agreements will have to be implemented, otherwise it's going to be very disappointing. As Ivo mentioned already, we are preparing to remember the 80 years of Diana Budisavljević's action, where some of the children in Stara Gradiška were saved and some were not. I think it's very important to memorize the international character of this action. And I think that this is something that is very important to emphasize. And I think that we're going to have our friends from various countries. And this important part of our action that we have started now is a call to students, the candidates for PhD candidates, to prepare their works on the issues or the subjects of marginalized groups, of the forgotten victims and survivors from World War II, as the insufficiently visible or invisible cases of resistance, in order to select best summaries, and so that in the conference in Regensburg in Germany, those works will be presented. And Thomas, yesterday, if those works, when they are going to be ready, will have the original speakers come with it. And I think that when it comes to a better, more quality works, we need the contribution from European levels in order for that to become European remembrance activity. And I think that many of the groups to become part of these actions in Croatia. So I think with common forces, we can kind of feed into this and make it bring into some sort of a level or layer of European remembrance action. In this sense, I'm not optimistic, but I think it's very important to create space for researchers from the other countries, so they will start to deal with things that haven't been completed, not even closely, in post-Yugoslav countries. Maybe Ivo will have some sort of a final comment on this, but because I would say that we have lived for a long time under the shadow of wrong perception, and we believe that only historians from our areas shall deal with those things, but I believe that the cooperation of our colleagues from our other countries is very important. And I personally believe that none of the countries can deal with the genocide, the heritage of genocide. And I think that we should go into international cooperation. I don't know if you have any more comments when it comes to that as well. Well, I will have something to add to this. And now I will try to speak in Croatian, and I hope that I believe that interpretation will be okay, because once I wanted to speak in Croatian without drafting my speech, and then I made it really hard for the interpreters.
So I think that people are people before of being citizen of any nation, and that's an observation I have about the anti-fascists and the people in the lager, but there as well an observation I have for historian. People are people, and people to write history. Yes, of course you have to know the language. Yes, of course you have the language and know where to find the documents. But we live in a world where with our informatic possibilities, the language is not so a big problem, firstly. And secondly, you have to have a humanitarian touch. You have to have human eyes to write history. So it's the history of the big numbers, of the big names. It's not more the real history. It was wrote in the academy. It is the history of people. And people can write from everywhere the history of people. It depends of what eyes, of what lens they have. And if we say the formidable history of the Dachau International Lager Committee, it was a lager committee who embraced different people, communists, anti-fascist, Democrats, and so on, from every country of Europe. When they came back in their nation, they had a big violence, psychological and physical violence. In every nation they came back, they have to become against national citizens. But their experience, their liberation of Dachau, were worldwide world experience. And that's, I mean, the history of the Second World War. It's okay to have a narrative who looks on the local level. But the nation level could be another local level. But what's about the sovereign nation, the meta-national, or the international in the sense of not transnational, but maybe without national, but just communities, municipalities. I mean, a history about Trieste, or about the border between Slovenia and Italy. It's not possible to speak about them looking from the Italian and Slovenian perspective. What are the people inside, what they made, what kind of history. The same for the Serbian resistance in Croatia, or for the communist Croatian resistance in Yugoslavia. What's about the helper, who helps him, who not. So I mean, this is maybe, that's why you are right when we don't need to be perfect perfect historians with perfect language skill and perfect knowledge skill to do something in the territory, so that a very good historian from Iceland can do a perfect study about anti-fascism in Istria. Trust me. It's so. It is demonstrated.
Puno hvala, Tomas. I samo ću pročitati komentar naše
And I'd like to read a comment from our colleague, Katerina Shimkiewicz, from Ukraine, that during the time of aggression from Russian aggression against Ukraine, she has come to Croatia. She says, it is very needed to involve the scientists from other countries of Europe. In Ukraine, they know very little about Gradiška and Jasenovac. And Sasha Peteyan asking, what is the main proposal that European community in the direction of change and developments of European policies, remembrance policies towards Croatia, Balkans, and the EU has to be taken into account? That's a big question. That's something that perhaps you need to think about. So what would you recommend to European parliamentarians? I will have to say that 3 years ago, we have spoken to Predrag Matic, and we have agreed that all involved in this program, from Germany, from Italy, Croatia, and Slovenia, will ask an active communication with European parliamentarians, with EMPs, and of course, try to look on who's going to be more interested from the other countries. May I shortly, Vesna? Yes, of course. So there are questions. There's a very ambitious question. I would like to respond very, give an utilitarian answer, just for us to exercise, and we have to be more practical in this. So the relation towards the history in the European level, if it's possible in any way, especially when it comes to facing the World War III, and if we are thinking about the fact that there are some wars that are going on that resemble that, and we are talking about the damage that has been created towards everything that has happened in the Soviet bloc, but also to our areas in former Yugoslavia, or the experience that have been synthesized in this aspect, and what is our goal towards when it comes to the relation with fascism, Nazism, and all the other movements. This thesis have harmed this perspective, not only in the definition, not what is bad or evil in the others, but something that can be evil in us, and something that can be an evil in modern societies, and also has decreased this potential drastically. The first is the self-criticism, and the other thing is that when it comes to the report against on history, Europe feels itself imperialistically, colonialistically, in relation to all of its conquering policies and politics that have preceded Nazism and Third Reich and everything else that we register up to date. And finally, also the issue of relation or attitude towards migrants, or the people that run away from all the different war and political and conflicts of different kinds. So I guess that on this question, I can have the pleasure to give this answer. Thanks a lot. I think thanks a lot on this. I think that we should not give up when it comes to ambitious projects and, of course, proposals. And of course, I think we should repeat what we can. Does anybody have anything else when it comes to the messages that we can send towards European parliamentarians and the European Union in itself? May I say a couple of words about that? First of all, I'd like to thank Katarina for this comment, and I'd like to mention just about 3 weeks ago in Croatia, there was a meeting where we had the PhD candidates that has been specialized on the systems. And this is going to be an example to do some sort of research and so on and so forth. And of course, someone would say that if you want to research Nazi camps, you need to know German, and then if you want to look at Ustasha camps, you need to know Croatian, and so on and so forth. And I think that it might be relevant when it comes to the other question, which is related to the messages for the MEPs. When we're talking about the Jasenovac camp, we have a specific situation. And when we're talking about the other camps, the Nazi camps from World War II, the biggest number of victims have been the Jews, and now the focus of European Union is on Holocaust, and that is understandable. But here we have a very specific situation when we're talking about Jasenovac camp. And the situation is that the biggest number of the victims have been, first of all, the Serbs, and then Romas, and then the Jews. So in this sense, this story does not really come in alignment with the story. The focus has been given to the victims of the Holocaust. It's very similar. And in this context, when we're talking about the common remembrance policy, it's very hard to achieve because every single country has its own specifics. And we have, for instance, the House of European History, which is opened in Brussels. And there's been lots of criticism towards this approach because you're trying to satisfy all of those parties and all these different layers of history. And then simply it is impossible to go into some specializing special when things are general. And I don't know how much this can contribute to building this common past of European Union, because there's a big difference between the North and the South and East and West. Thanks, Ivo. Katarina said thank you for your answer, and Sasha Petean also said thank you to Aneta. And we are getting close to 4 o'clock when we said we're going to conclude this. And if we're not going to have an additional question in the next 1 minute or so, I'd like to invite you for the next part of this dialogue that is going to proceed to our meeting in Gradiška, which is not going to be only an event of the commemoration, anniversary commemoration character. We're going to have a workshop, an educational program that is going to be dedicated to developing educational materials that are going to be shared between the teachers. And before that, I hope that we are going to have a cultural program. And then I would like to ask you in the second part of this dialogue. And of course, we cannot say that it's going to be 7th or 8th of July. It's going to be online. We're going to interpret it, because we're the ones that we are going to help with contributing to this dialogue. We need to check what is the day and the time that works for them. But we will announce this, I would say, until June 20th on social networks and internet sites. And so please take a look to that. And of course, we're going to send an invitation so that we can jointly think about the ways to advance the cooperation, and also to think about the messages that we jointly want to send to the decision makers. Sometimes it might seem like we've sent them, but I believe that there's no room for pessimism. It's up to us to articulate those messages, to, of course, send them correctly and to advocate for them in the public. And I believe that in the center there's going to be some progress for better. The challenges are great. In the post-Yugoslav context, we are facing with the 30 years of revisionism. It is not easy to make the steps that we intend to make, but nonetheless, we've been working for all those years, and we're going to continue doing more steps and more efforts and work with the researchers, with the students and the institutions that come from whole of Europe. So if, well, right now we don't have any more questions, I'd like to thank all of you that have been part of the panel today. First of all, to the panelists from all the sides. And I'd like also to thank Bashkin Fazliu, who has interpreted this. I hope that we can send this on the web pages of Documenta. Thanks a lot. So we can publish this on Documenta's web pages already during this week, and we will continue to work additionally inspired and motivated, and we wish you a very good day, and